You stood on a white balcony, 60 floors up, and the whole city of neon burned beneath you like it belonged to you. Because it did. Every boat in that harbor, every club on that strip, every crooked badge in that skyline, yours. 6 years earlier, you had stepped off a boat with nothing but the shirt on your back and a scar somebody gave you for free. Nobody thought you would ever be anything. Not a single person. This is how a nobody swallowed a whole city, and why the men who wear the crown this bright never get to keep it. The year was 1980. You came over on the Marie ELL boat lift. 125,000 people crammed in the 1,700 boats in 6 months, and you were just one more face in the crowd. No papers that meant anything, no degree, barely any English. You washed dishes in the back of a kitchen where nobody bothered to learn your name. You were invisible. The kind of man people look straight through on the street, like you were just part of the wall. And maybe that was the first gift the city ever gave you. Because invisible men can watch, and you watched everything. You saw where the money went, who it went to, and how nobody ever seemed to pay for it. Because in the 80s, there were no cameras. No phone in every pocket. Nothing watching the corners. If a deal happened in a parking lot at 2 in the morning, it simply never happened. The whole decade was one long blind spot, and a man with nothing left to lose can do a lot inside a blind spot. So when a man they called the boss offered you $50 to carry a package across town and asked no questions, you carried it. Then you carried another. You were quiet. You were fast. You never skimmed, and you never talked. And here's the first smart thing you ever did. You never touched the product yourself. You never used it. You never bragged about it, and you never wrote a single thing down. Everything lived in your head. Every name, every number, every debt somebody owed you. A man with no books is a man with nothing anyone can ever find. And slowly you started to see how much money was really moving through that city. Miami's banks were drowning in cash. One branch of the Federal Reserve was sitting on a $7 billion surplus. The biggest pile of paper money in the entire country, bigger than every other branch combined. 12 men were each washing $500 million a year through those banks, and not one teller ever asked where it came from. You watched suitcases of hundreds walk through marble lobbies like they were groceries. And that was the day you understood the truth. The product was not the business. Money was the business. The white was just how you printed it. First time somebody tried to take what was yours, you learned exactly what kind of man you were about to become. The bigger crew leaned on you. Pay us or disappear. The old you might have run. The new, you just smiled and asked them for a week. And in that week, you didn't buy a single gun. You bought information. You found out which of their men hadn't been paid, which cop they had forgotten to keep happy, and which of their shipments was already being washed by the wrong people. You didn't have to start a war. You just quietly lit the match and let them burn it down themselves. A week later, that crew fell apart from the inside, and you never even raised your voice. That was the day you understood your real weapon. It was never the gun. It was that you were always 3 moves ahead of every other man in the room. You kept waiting for the law to come down on you. It never did. Police had doubled their own force almost overnight, hiring so fast they stopped checking who they let in. So half the badges in the city were just another crew. One that robbed dealers and sold the packages back themselves. And that only made your way smarter. While other crews shot it out over street corners and ended up in the morning paper, you did the quiet math. Why fight for a corner when you could just buy the cop who watched it? Why go to war with the rival when you could pay the man who signed his paychecks instead? You never raised your voice. And you never raised a gun if a stack of cash could do the same job cleaner. The judges could be reached. The banks were already yours. You stopped being afraid of the system the day you understood there wasn't one. There was only a price, and you were becoming the man who always knew exactly what it was. By now, you weren't carrying packages anymore. You were building something, quietly. One loyal man at a time, you had grown a crew that answered to you before it answered to anyone else. Because you paid better, you planned smarter, and you never once let your people to take a fall alone. The boss never even saw it happening. He had gotten fat and slow. Gold rings, fat cigar, the same free restaurants every single week. He had stopped being hungry. You hadn't. So the night you finally took it all, his routes, his people, his corners, there was barely a fight. You had already won it, quietly, months before, the smart way. You told yourself it was only business. Something went quiet inside you that night, and it never spoke again. The humble man who washed dishes in the back of that kitchen was gone. You didn't even notice him leave. For years, the city had been carved up. A dozen crews, a dozen little kings, each one guarding their own few blocks. And you wanted all of it. This time, there was no quiet trick that could win it clean. This time, it was a war. The rivals came at you, and you came back harder. Cut off their supply, you turned their own lieutenants against them, and you moved faster than men twice your size could ever think. The streets ran loud that summer. Then, one crew at a time, they went quiet. Not because you had the most men. Because you were the one nobody could predict. When it was over, their corners were your corners. Their routes were your routes. Every bot that used to belong to somebody else now answered to you, and you alone. There was no one left in the whole city standing above you. There was only you, and a long way down you couldn't see yet. After the war, there was nothing left to fight for. So you started to spend. Bought a white mansion with more rooms than you would ever sleep in. Cars you never drove. A gold watch for every day of the week. Pink sunsets over the water. White suits that never wrinkled. A speedboat that could outrun anything the Coast Guard owned. But the real change wasn't the money. It was the feeling. Somewhere in all that noise, you started to believe that nothing in this world could ever touch you. You had outsmarted the boss, the cops, the rivals, the banks. So why would anyone ever catch you? Parties never stopped. You would walk in, and the whole room would turn towards you like you were the weather. You had stepped off a boat with a scar and nothing to your name, and now grown men were afraid to say that name too loud. You grew the beard because the face in the mirror didn't look dangerous enough without it. Somewhere in all that noise, you stopped counting the funerals and started counting the cars. They finally arrested you in '85, and you weren't scared for a single second, because by then, you owned the very pieces of the machine that were supposed to grind you up. Your people paid the judges a quiet visit. They reminded a few witnesses how easily memory can fail, and you walked out the front door in a fresh white suit while the cameras flashed, smiling like a man who had already won. That was the moment you finally felt it all the way, invincible, untouchable, king. The law itself couldn't hold. It was also the exact moment you lost everything, because walking out of that courthouse put your face on every front page in Florida, and you had just told the whole country your name. Here is what nobody tells you. The men hunting you had known about you for years. They just didn't care. They were built to catch whales, the big names moving tons, and a quiet man moving quiet weight wasn't worth the paperwork. Getting big is the thing that finally put you on the map. And it gets worse. The same government chasing men like you had been quietly letting the product flow the whole time. Years later, Senate investigators found the proof. State Department had paid known traffickers hundreds of thousands of dollars just to fly cargo for a war it wanted to win. The suits needed the powder moving. What they did not need was a loud man and a gold watch turning it into front-page news. They needed a name to burn, and you had just volunteered. The raids began that winter. Stash houses went up in smoke, and then the thing you never planned for finally happened. One of your own, a man you had fed, a man you had trusted for years, sat down with the suits and started talking. You never saw it coming, because you had stopped believing anyone would ever dare. Slept with a gun, and he trusted no one. Not the crew, not even the bearded stranger in the mirror. The city that once turned toward you like the weather now felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. But you made it. Understand that part. A nobody off a boat. A man with no degree and a borrowed scar. Face that nobody, not one single person, believed in, and you took an entire city and made it kneel. Stood on that white balcony, 64s up, and every light in Vice City burned just for you. You were the king. There was only one question left, and it was the one you never let yourself ask. For how long? Because the quiet ones, the careful ones, they lasted. But the flashy ones? The gold, the cars, the headlines, a crown worn this bright? They never last long. You didn't build a throne up there. You built a countdown. And down in all that neon, it had already started to tick. If you want to watch another nobody build an empire out of nothing and then watch it turn on him, there's one waiting on the screen right now. Go take it.